I honestly wouldn't have predicted that 2023 would be the best year for streaming audio gear, but it is. And I think the Rodecaster Duo represents the future of what we should be looking for in products like this. It embodies basically everything you'd want in a streaming audio setup, minus a few little caveats. And now it's available in white. This whole creator's kit is now available in white for a limited time. I'll have a link to it in the description below. They sent the whole kit out. I'm not going to use all of this day to day, and I have some minor complaints about the colors, but overall, this is pretty wild. We got the PSA 1 Plus, we've got the Rode Podmic, we've got the NTH 100 headphones, and the Rodecaster Duo down here, available in white for a limited time through these creator bundles they're doing, and I'll have a link to it in the description. I gotta say, I am not the all-white minimal aesthetic kind of creator that would necessarily want this entire setup in this way. But what I like is that we're getting options, and I like having individual pieces that I can get this way. So like the Rodecaster Duo in white looks absolutely stunning here. Like this thing is gorgeous, especially with the RGB lighting. And in setups like mine that are filled with neon and, you know, LED lights to bring out a more colorful aesthetic rather than just all white minimalism, the individual white components can actually play a lot better to that by way of bouncing light off of it and absorbing more of that colorful light and, you know, creating the effect that I want, which is pretty sick. My only complaint is that the whites aren't all perfectly matched. Like the white on the sheath here for the PSA 1 Plus doesn't necessarily match the material. The rest of the material does match the Podmic pretty well. I feel like the Rodecaster Duo is almost a little bit more yellowish white than the rest of it. And then the headphones here, because they're more of a glossy kind of plastic, are a bit more of just like a blue or white. Like these look like some Aperture Science, like Portal white colors that makes the rest of these look a little bit more yellowish by comparison. So I think there's a couple perfectionists in the audience that will absolutely be super miffed that they don't match perfectly. But I think in use and day-to-day, like, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. I've already showcased the PSA 1 Plus in a couple previous videos at this point, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. I do like the all-white aesthetic, and it makes the brand logo that everyone is insisting on putting on their mic arms at the moment a lot less obvious, which I am a huge fan of. I'm not personally a big fan of the Rode Podmic itself. A lot of you all are, though, so I'm always trying to give it a new fair shake. We are using the built-in Podmic preset and everything like that in the Rodecaster Duo here. If I go to the settings, you can see here I've got, you know, the default processing and gain and all of that, which we'll talk about in a moment. I do like the white aesthetic on that, and I think it contrasts with a black XLR cable and the black grill pretty nicely here. I kind of dig it. I have already scuffed it a little bit, and that's the problem with the white stuff is they, especially the metal things, like they get scratched and show wear a little bit easier. But honestly, I'm kind of a fan of the used and worn aesthetic, so I'm not sure that I'm going to complain about that either. But we do have that set up here. And so the main focus, since I have already talked about these components, I've been using the NTH 100s in the house just since I need close back in there for a while. They're solid headphones. I am not a huge fan of close backs at all. I rarely have a use case for them. I have them in my house if I need to work and like tune out my kid or something while my wife is watching them. But otherwise, like, I'm not a close back headphone person, so I'm not even going to really try to review them. They're serviceable for what they are, and I think the build quality is ultimately really, really nice on them. They have a lot of considerations here that other companies don't make, like the locking headphone or the locking size adjustment, the wire run through the band. It is a solid band rather than a suspension style like I like, but there is enough padding in there that it's not going to hurt the top of my head like most of this style of headphone do. So in many ways, I'm a huge fan of it. They also have a headphone or a headset accessory you can get to use it as a headset with the Rodecaster Duo on the front input here. Which is pretty wild. I don't have that here, however. The Rodecaster Duo is by far my favorite audio product I have touched in a long time. And honestly, I wasn't sure how much I would like it, and I wasn't sure how much it would be relevant to you all in the post-GoXLR world, as I might call it. This thing is amazing. So I want to say right off the bat, this thing is $500. It is very expensive. Same price as the GoXLR launched at. If you are considering getting one of these, I want you to do me a favor, and when you get it, do not look at any other audio products. Like, get your microphone, get the Rodecaster Duo if you're getting it, and then stop shopping for interfaces or mixers. This is one of those products that you get now, and especially if they deliver on some of the updates they're promising, you can just have forever, basically. for years of content making, and continuing the upgrade cycle rather than just improving your content would be a massive mistake. Ultimately, this thing is a mixer, an audio interface, and a multi-track recorder all in one. It's basically an all-in-one podcasting station. Now, back in 2018, the original Rodecaster Pro launched, and then they did a Rodecaster Pro 2, and then this is the shrunk down version for people who only need 1 or 2 microphones rather than 4, and can just happily record in it here, which I absolutely dig. It supports, like I said, 2 1/4 inch or XLR inputs, but it also supports Bluetooth inputs. It supports connectivity to the Rode Wireless Go microphones. It supports dual USB hosts, as I talked about with the Lewitt Connect, so you can do either single PC and just get an extra USB input by plugging the second cable in, which is interesting since the other devices just give you more virtual devices through the same USB, or you can plug it into a second PC and do dual PC or Mac and PC or whatever audio, both for just mixing for yourself or for dual PC streaming. Makes that a lot easier. And in your routing settings, you have a mix minus option, which I cannot really show here while I'm recording, but you have the option to mix minus that second USB output, so it's not hearing itself, so you can use the microphone running to that second PC for game chat or whatever. It is incredibly versatile. You've got a headset mic input on the front. You can assign these to any order you want. And if you have the Podmic USB, you can use that in the second USB port with a very recent firmware update and use a USB mic with the mixer. Something that I have said for years cannot be done because most mixers are analog only, XLR 1/4, whatever. We're now getting to the point where that's more possible. They have just released the firmware update allowing the Podmic USB to be used in that second USB-C port, which is absolutely bonkers. Here we have the Podmic USB running into the Rodecaster Duo. It required a firmware update on both the microphone and the Rodecaster Duo using the beta firmware on the Rodecaster, which I guess breaks my theory that any microphone could be added since it needed a firmware update, but I still think audio drivers are generic enough. It could be done. There are kids yelling outside, but this is a demo regardless. Test, 1, 2, 3. 3 rings for the Elven Kings under the sky. 7 for their dwarf lords in the halls of stone. 9 for the mortal men doomed to die. You get the idea. Something I did want to note is that with the Podmic USB input, we have a ton of high-frequency screech around the 20 kilohertz range that I assumed when I was originally editing the video would be CRT flyback, whatever, but I didn't have any CRTs on in the scene. And it is just in the sample with the Podmic. It's not in any of my recordings. And you can see here it's super strong around 19 kilohertz and then just cranks up some weirdness right above it. I believe this is some sort of USB power feedback issue that without a specific EQ profile on the device to basically just lop off anything above 18 kilohertz, if you play that clip back, I left it untouched at like more than 1 time speed. It sounds bad.
Are you tired of being a streaming noob? Do you want to learn how to stream like a pro? Then you need the definitive guide to OBS. The ultimate masterclass for OBS Studio, the definitive guide to OBS will teach you everything you need to know to become a streaming and recording expert in no time at all, even if your computer is a potato. To celebrate the relaunch of my definitive guide to OBS on a new amazing platform, I'm offering a special 50% discount. Use coupon code RELAUNCH at checkout.
I'm really hoping they or someone else making a similar product will keep working to update the driver support on that to support virtually any USB microphone, because most USB microphones are just a basic plug-and-play audio driver. I don't see any reason you wouldn't be able to just plug any USB mic into a USB port that would support it and use them that way. So that would open the door for a lot of stuff. Rode is it's really interesting here because the thing is set up to support a lot of stuff. Like if you select your microphone input, they have a ton of presets for different microphones. A lot of them are obviously Rode mics. So, they've got presets built in for the Podmic, the Broadcaster, the Procaster, the NT1, NT1A, but then they have a couple third-party ones like the Electro Voice RE20 and the Shure SM7B. They have presets for that built in. So while a lot of this, including the headphone output, weirdly enough, is built primarily to cater to their own products, they do have some third-party references and support built in. And so I think just generically supporting USB-C, USB mics over the USB-C port, even if it's your mileage may vary kind of situation and they go in and validate themselves or just let it be a Wild West if you want to use non-road products, I think that'd be pretty wild. Ultimately, my big kind of impressed take from this thing is the versatility and the quality. Like build quality wise and functionality quality wise, this thing is incredible. The mic preamps are really, really high quality. Everyone's review at this point quotes that if you're using something like an SM7B or an RE20, instead of using an inline mic activator like the Cloud Lifter, the Fethead, whatever, you just use it direct on here. And that supposedly when you plug in a mic activator, you get more hiss than using it direct. To me, because you shouldn't have any hiss from using a mic activator, to me that's a little concerning that you're getting hiss from using a mic activator. But ultimately, yeah, these have really seemingly impressive high quality preamps with up to 75 decibels of gain they can provide. And you do not need mic activators for those beefier dynamic mics with it, which is pretty sweet. I know everyone's done this test by now, but I want to verify it for myself since I have a small collection of different preamps or inline mic activators. I want to go ahead and do the noise floor test because it's one of those weird things that even though everyone's video is basically the same, I kind of don't believe it. So this is the SM7B. Well, this is the DB, but in the dynamic no preamp mode. Run directly into the Rodecaster Duo. Test 1, 2, 3, and here's the noise floor. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cycle between the noise floor of the built-in preamp, or the normal mode, the built-in preamp, and then all of my existing inline preamps, so you can just see the noise floor. So I'm literally just going to set the microphone on the table and record switching between the modes. And you can use a mix of condenser and dynamics on here. You can use kind of whatever you want with that second input and whatever else you're routing in here, which is great to see. The overall just quality of presentation here is pretty stellar compared to something like the GoXLR, which was always, it was an expensive product and it did okay. I never really liked how the compressor or the EQ or any of the onboard processing sounded, and the mic preamps were touted as being really high quality, but over time, I became less and less of a fan of it. This thing just comes out the gate absolutely rocking. And versatility-wise, as I mentioned with all those inputs, you have so many different configurations you can use. And right now, I am recording it into my iPad as I'm using the Blackmagic app here. I could not get Rode Central Mobile to work on iPad, but I have it running into my Blackmagic camera app here, just recording in case I want to show anything off here. And it's working just fine, which is pretty stellar. You've got so much support. Quick reminder on the physical ports of this thing. You have the headphone output in the front. You've got dual XLR or 1/4 inch combo jacks. They are mounted upside down, which may be more convenient for looking over and plugging them in. But for my right angle connector cables, it kind of gets kind of awkward as they shoot up the top. You've got 1/4 inch speaker outputs, which I have requested show back up on audio interfaces from Elgato and GoXLR and whatever for a long time. Love to see it. You've got dual 1/4 inch headphone outputs on the back, which can be configured for different impedance levels and things like that. But you also have the 3.5 millimeter input or output on the front, which can be used for headphones and headsets, which is pretty nice. And then you've got that dual USB connectivity for computer use. You've got micro SD recording, which I'm also doing here for redundancy. You also have a network port. If you want to use it over the network, at some point they might add functionality for that. Something like the DLZ Creator from Mackie has functionality for it. This unit doesn't at the moment. So I have it connected to Wi-Fi right now. You can go in and do that, or you can plug it in here, but you don't get anything from that. And then it uses USB-C for power, but it uses a higher voltage, so they supply a power supply for it, which is interesting. It doesn't power over the USB port, and then there is a dedicated power button, which a lot of you have been wanting to see. You can connect it to the network, but it doesn't do anything at the moment. But what I love is that they seem committed to adding more and more functionality to this thing over time, which really unlocks a lot of potentials. Like the difference between this and the Rodecaster Pro 2 is just the number of inputs. They didn't slim down on any of the functionality. And so they've continued adding more support for things like the USB pod mic over the USB port. I assume at some point they might add some functionality for the networking. They're supposed to be adding more USB devices soon, but that's been in the progress for months. We'll talk about that. But overall, like, there's so much versatility in the way you can connect things. My only big complaint with the I/O in that regard is there's no dedicated 3.5 mil aux connector, which a lot of people use for things like HDMI audio extractors, running in little music players. Just like having that flexibility of just a generic audio port coming in is kind of disappointing to see that it's missing. And there are some sort of workarounds, but ultimately, especially without more generic USB audio support on that second USB port, it is a pretty big limiting factor for some people. Ultimately, when I mention things like that or the audio tracks, keep in mind this is for the people that might be considering switching from or were originally shopping for a GoXLR, because that thing has much more virtual audio devices and has the optical input and 3.5 mil inputs. And so I'm just trying to keep the potential GoXLR people in mind here, as there are some limitations there. Again, that other limitation with the USB port. So when you plug it into your computer over USB, you get two virtual audio devices that you can send stuff to. You have your dedicated main USB mix and then a chat mix, which could be used for Zoom, Skype, TeamSpeak, Discord, Teams, whatever people are using these days. But then you can get a third virtual device. Well, I guess it's not virtual at that point, by plugging in the second USB port. And so then you have a total of 3 devices you can send stuff from your computer to. On something like the GoXLR, you have, or the Wave XLR from Elgato, you have a bunch of these virtual devices that you can send stuff to and then mix in the console here. This one, you only get the 2 to 3. And so that's going to be a pretty big limiting factor for some people. For me, as I've slimmed down from my big mixer setup, from my GoXLRs and stuff like that in general, it has revealed to me that I don't really need all that stuff. That for a lot of streams and whatever, I need a couple virtual devices for sure. But ultimately, I'm doing a lot more of my mixing in the actual mixer these days, or whatever interface I'm using, and just committing it, printing it, as they would say, to my recording, or giving me the flexibility to remove like 1 or 2 elements when necessary. And so I think for a lot of people, you might be disappointed, especially since it's the same price as the GoXLR launched at, that you're not getting as much I/O. But I think in practical terms, in terms of what you'd actually be using, I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. It's got a sample pad. Actually, it's got what they call smart pads, which can do lots of stuff.
Like turn on effects so I can sound like a monster. Fatality. Monster. Kill.
You got stuff like that. You've got a sample pad, which unfortunately you cannot record samples while using the FX, which kind of sucks, but be sure to like and subscribe. You can just tap a little button, play those samples there. You can drag on files from your computer to attach them. You can do all kinds of stuff with that. You can also control mixer functionality from the smart pads. And if you set up the MIDI settings, you can send MIDI commands over here, which makes it kind of like a mini Stream Deck if you want, by using something like StreamerBot or Atom, or even just the dedicated plugins for MIDI control for OBS. You could technically send commands to your stream here as well, which is pretty sick. You've got the ability both to send audio over USB, as I'm doing now, but also record internally to, well, not internally, but to a micro SD card in this device, which I'm doing for redundancy's sake, because I'm recording it in my Blackmagic cam here for the audio, but I don't trust the USB connection sometimes, and I just, if something goes wrong, I want to be able to have a copy, and just having it there is always pretty nice. You've got dedicated faders. These are not motorized like the GoXLR, but you can control levels that actually go to your mix. You got different options in the settings for whether they're pre-fader or post-fader for what you are recording or hearing. You've got mute buttons. You've got pre-fader listen buttons here. You've got the toggle buttons to hello. There we go. You got soloing buttons, so you can control what you actually hear to your ears. That's these green ones. And then you've got the dedicated input buttons to control what the routing is in terms of what device is going where, which microphone preset you're using, everything like that. You also have dedicated routing control and like output control in the menus itself. And everything that is controlled in this device runs internally, which means it syncs across computers, it syncs to your mobile device. If you have to reinstall the software, none of it's lost. You can do it from the desktop software or here, and it all stays in sync. You got controls for what goes to what monitor, how your monitoring output is controlled, what you're listening to in terms of pre-fader or post-fader, which just means, are you hearing your microphone before the levels are applied and any effects are applied? And yet that would be used for like setting gain or whatever. Or are you hearing it after all that because you just want to monitor? It can also affect latency and things like that. You've also got processing controls here for just like master processing. There's also options for USB multi-track recording if you want to hook it up to a DAW, and they have also released ACO drivers for the Rodecaster Pros and Duos now, which is pretty cool, which means theoretically in OBS you could record the individual audio devices, but that's honestly my biggest complaint about this thing in the first place, other than the lack of aux, is that you can't capture the individual audio devices. So, you know, whatever submix control you get in the software is great, but if you want the ultimate flexibility to record something in post, even with a GoXLR or whatever, I think it's a bad habit, but what I was doing was just recording every individual audio device that I would want in my video to a separate track in OBS that I could then mix and master and separate out whatever in post when I'm editing. You can't do that with this. You just get recordings for that chat output, for your main output, and that's basically it, unless you're using a digital audio workstation and using the multi-track USB mode and that kind of thing. You can't do that. And to me, not exposing those devices kind of stinks. There's probably reasons for it. It definitely causes a lot of driver latency issues, as a lot of people discovered with stuff like the Beacon and the GoXLR and whatever. But that is a missing feature that I am sorely missing here. Supposedly more... Like this was one of the biggest complaints when the Rodecaster Pro 2 originally launched, and supposedly, you know, Rode is bringing those features here. It's been like almost a year since that was announced, and it still hasn't happened. It's not easy work. So they've delivered a lot of these other weird features that you wouldn't expect. So I'm assuming it's still coming, but don't buy a product based on promises. Buy a product based on what it has. So if you're going to really miss these, wait, or just don't buy it at all and buy something that gives you what you need. But I don't know. I've not been using this very long. I just wanted to get the video out. I'm going to be playing with this a lot more. I actually have two. I have the white one, and then I have a black one. On the back of this thing, it has a VESA mount. They don't have official backplates for sale yet. Apparently, that's coming in the future. But you can just mount it up with a normal VESA plate. So I've ordered a couple VESA mounting plates that I'm going to use to attach it to basically like little desk clamps and get these set up at like my retro streaming station and my main desktop. And I really think this has kind of been the solution I've been looking for a mix of just high quality audio recording and the flexibility of having some physical controls on board. And by having this at my desktop setup, I also have a little bit of redundancy because, as you all know, I have struggled with DPC audio latency, or crackles, pops, stutters, skips, dropouts, whatever, in my audio recordings for a year or so now. And I've switched platforms to a Mac and have mostly alleviated ever encountering these issues. But the ability to, whenever I am recording a video, have a recording going on an SD card without some complex routing setup gives me a ton of peace of mind. And so between that and everything else, I'm in love with this thing. Now, I still have the Mackie DLZ Creator waiting for me to check out. It is a big, much more monstrous beast to take on for, creator audio. I'm excited to look into it. Maybe I'll fall more in love with that and have a giant mixer back on my desk. But as of right now, this is going on 2 of my desks, and I kind of want it on 2 more desks because I'm loving it that much. To me, this represents the future of creator audio, and it has been a darn good year for creator audio. Like, this thing can do so much. Like, the biggest features, if I'm going to leave you with something, this has been a long kind of rambly style review. I can do an updated, like, here's how it's been after 6 months kind of video in the future if y'all want. And I will have a dedicated setup tutorial for this in OBS and everything like that if you want. But every once in a while, a product hits me in such a way, and this is one such thing, that I just want to get my thoughts out and talk about it now. I know I'm late to it in the first place, but like, show my enthusiasm, show the friction I'm encountering now, and talk about it more over time. Make it an evolving conversation, especially something like this that I'm committed to having in my setup. But I think this is just going to be an evolving conversation because there's so much to dive in with it, and there's so many scenarios to use it with that I want to hear your comments on what you want to learn about if I didn't cover it here. And I want to leave you with the things I'm most excited for with it, and that is what I just said about recording internally. So no matter what I'm recording, whether I'm recording one of my paid courses, a YouTube video, an interview, having that backup copy on an SD card will save me so many headaches that I've already encountered with all of my different productions. At least a couple times a year that like truly just hurt to encounter. This will save my bacon in that many ways, but also the integration with the Rode wireless mics. It supports the Mi, the Wireless 2, and I think the new Pro model. I've only seen the Mi and the 2 listed, but I have a 2. I have the original Go kit. It's not supported, but the Mi and the 2 and higher should be supported. Being able to set that up for my streams where I'm doing something at the desk, but I always end up moving throughout my studio and wanting to show you all stuff. I have made multiple videos and multiple stream attempts trying to show you all a way to do that, and I've never quite been satisfied with how I have to commit to the results. And I even had a couple other ideas that I've still been working on that we might test too. But the ability to just hot swap between a desktop microphone like this and the Rode Wireless Go, so I can just be like, all right, I'm getting up, press the mute button and unmute button or a macro or something, and just have clear audio ready to go. That's game changing. That is truly game changing, and I haven't seen enough people talk about this. I think either lack of access to the Go's in the first place or just not being that kind of workflow. But to me, that is the biggest underrated feature of this, is being able to attach a wireless mic to it and hot swap between them. There are so many streamers that want the flexibility to move to different spots but are so attached to the classic desktop mounted microphone style that would benefit from this. So maybe we'll have a whole dedicated video on that setup in the future. Anyway, links to this bundle will be in the description. I know this has been a way long, overly rambly video, but hopefully you learned something about it. Hopefully you appreciate the style. Like I said, let me know your questions in the comments so we can keep this conversation going. Go check out my OBS course. It is still half off. We're probably running through Thanksgiving for the relaunch on the new platform. I've got it set up with chapters and tracking your progress and completion certificates and all that. Glitch.mov. Link in the description. And remember to be kind. Rewind.